Welcome to another bonus edition of Upon Further Review.
Upon further review,
And in this edition, we'll be talking about the Detroit Lions versus the Minnesota Vikings. And this Week 6 matchup will be happening on October 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can catch that on your local Fox affiliates as these two NFC North rivals go at it. And the Lions are 3-2. And the Vikings are 2-3 entering this game. As the Lions were in first place in the division, of course now they're tied for first with the Packers, and they need to keep pace. Of course, the Vikings are tied with the Bears for last out of the four teams. And with the Lions, they started off with a victory against the New York Giants on Monday Night Football there in Week 1. A very impressive victory at that. Of course, since then they've been struggling. They've been kind of up and down. They went to Carolina and they got beat, 24-7. Then they beat the Packers in Detroit, a low-scoring game. It's all about defense for Detroit this year. That's their strength for sure. It was 19-7. Then they went to New York and they beat the Jets in New York. But then last week they hosted the Buffalo Bills and they lost by a field goal. And in that game, their kicker, Alex Henry, missed 3 field goals. They let him go after the game. And they went and they picked up Matt Prater. So with Matt Prater as their kicker now, they should have a better chance to win this week in Minnesota. As the defense of the Lions is excellent, and they'll definitely get some field goal opportunities for Prater on their offense. But let's look at the Vikings, how they got to 2-3. They started off by beating the Rams in St. Louis. They beat them up bad too, 34-6, and it was talks of if they were going to the Super Bowl. Of course, then lots of things happened, and to the least of which was a couple of losses in a row. First, losing to New England in Minnesota, then going to New Orleans and losing to the Saints as they got beat up bad in both games, lost by double digits. Then they hosted the Falcons and they actually won by double digits. An impressive win over Atlanta. Of course, Atlanta has not had much success on the road this year. And then they went to Green Bay last week and they got destroyed on Thursday Night Football in prime time in front of a nationwide audience as they lost that game 42-10, as they were without many of their players, as I'm sure you're very familiar with. They were on their third string quarterback at that point. And that's going to be, a question mark this week going into the game. Will Teddy Bridgewater be back, or will it be Christian Ponder? And if it's Christian Ponder, the Vikings don't stand much of a chance at all. Of course, they also are without their star running back, and their best player on their team, Cordero Patterson, has been struggling. He only has, I think 2 catches in the last 2 weeks or something like that. I mean, he's just not been showing up. If you actually look to see his season stats, he has 4 catches total on the season for just 95 yards. I mean, a good average, 23.8, but only 4 catches. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. He's rushed the ball 4 times for 95 yards, and that is an impressive 23.8 average, regardless whether that's a reception or a rush. It's actually even more impressive that it's his rushing average. But he's caught 15 passes for 189 yards for an average of 12.6, which is, averaging more than a first down. It's not the best on the team, but it's not the worst. But he needs to, produce. They got to get him the ball. Of course, Matt Castle and him had a rapport. Castle went down. Bridgewater came in. They were yet to really get going for whatever reason. But they need to get... Bridgewater's talented, and if he's going to be there, that's actually definitely a bonus for the Vikings, but he's got to get Patterson involved. Of course, that goes on the coaches. They've got to get him in the game plan, which, you would figure the best player, you should put him in your game plan, right? But the Vikings aren't the only team that's been seeing some struggles from players they thought they were going to get big performances out of this year, because the Lions have been seeing next to no production out of Reggie Bush. He only has 161 rushing yards on the season, which is pretty pathetic. He averages only 3.6 per carry. He does have 142 receiving yards off of 20 receptions. Of course, that's for a 7.1 average. So Bush just not really getting much done, getting some yards, but that's really where Detroit has been falling short. And you'll see that right here as we go inside the numbers. When we look at the passing offense of Detroit, Detroit was the top 5. Now they're number 10 when it comes to passing offense. And the Vikings are 27th. So the Vikings are really bad. They're in the bottom. The Lions are still hanging on there in the top 10. When it comes to pass defense, the Lions are 5th in the NFL. And the Vikings are 11th. So definitely the advantage in the passing attack on both sides, offense and defense, goes to the Lions. Now we look at the rushing attack of these two teams, and the Lions are 28th in the NFL in rushing yards per game. And the Vikings are 10th. So it's a reversal. As bad as the Lions are at running the ball, is as bad as the Vikings are at passing, and as good as the Lions are at passing the ball, that's as good as the Vikings are at running, regardless of who's their back. Because they've got obviously some good rushing, rush blocking. Then on defense, though the Lions are 4th in the NFL in yards allowed through the ground, and the Vikings are 19th in yards allowed on the ground. So once again, advantage Lions. Whereas the Vikings, yes, they can run the ball much better than the Lions. They actually have a running attack. The Lions have no running attack. But the Detroit Lions defense is solid, and they do not let up yards, whether it's through the air or on the ground. And so the Vikings, though, their run defense isn't so good, and maybe we actually see Bush do something, or whoever they might hand off the ball to this week. We look at points scored, though. Both of these teams struggle to put up points. The Lions are 27th, and the Vikings are actually 26th. They're better, believe it or not. But then when it comes to defense, though, the Lions allow the second least amount of points in the NFL, whereas the Vikings let up the 20th least. So the Lions, the advantage clearly goes to them here as well. As in all categories, really, it's in favor of the Lions. Overall, when you look at the matchups, so the Lions, even though they are struggling to put up points, they don't let up points. And if we actually look at the scores in their games, when they won, they put up 35, then 19, then 24. When they lost, they put up 7 and then 14. And when they won, they allowed 14 points, 7 points, and 17 points. And in their losses, they allowed 24 and then 17. So the most points they allowed was that 24 to Carolina and Carolina. But if you don't count that, it would be the 17 points they allowed to both Buffalo and New York. So when they only allowed 7 to Green Bay and 14 to the Giants, 17 to the Jets. So the Lions, when going against Minnesota, let's see how they score. They're actually kind of an interesting team, because when they won, they scored 34 points, and then they scored 41 points. So when they win is when they put up more than 30. Of course, if you put up more than 30, you're going to win most of the time. But in their losses, they scored 7, 9, and 10. So if they only put up 10 points or less, they're going to lose. And obviously, of course, when they lost, they let up 30, they let up 20, and they let up 42. Even when they won in week 4, they let up 28. Of course, in week 1, they only let up 6. So when you look at the way they score, the points that they allow, and versus Detroit, it kind of looks like as if it would be a type of game where, some like 20-14, maybe 21-17, something like that. Kind of a close game. But Detroit will win, because they're not going to let up the points. Whereas they should be able to put up points, even though Megatron probably isn't going to play. But Golden Tate has been, putting up numbers, even though Megatron really hasn't. And Golden Tate's actually the leading receiver on the Lions this year with 31 receptions and 451 receiving yards and a touchdown. Johnson does have 2 touchdowns, but he has 348 yards off of 22 receptions. So when he gets the ball, Johnson has been doing it, but he's been banged up. So it's probably a better, a thing for them to just let him get a rest against a weak opponent like Minnesota. Of course, the Vikings could make it interesting. Like I said, I expect it to be like a 3-4, 5-point game. The Lions could make it more. They could win by double digits. And even the Vikings, if they get rolling, as we see when they, when momentum is in their favor, and they start putting points on the board, they don't stop. So it'll be interesting to see which Vikings team shows up. Is it going to be the Vikings team, in week 1 and week 4? Or is it going to be the Vikings team from week 2, 3, or 5? And I would actually have to say that the Lions are more comparable to the Saints or even the Packers than they are to the Rams or the Falcons, or even really the Patriots. Except the Lions not having the running game, that's where Minnesota got the chance to win. If they can keep pounding the rock, if they keep the ball out of Matthew Stafford's hands, then they got a chance to win. That's always going to be, pretty much how it is. If you can keep the ball on your side, keep it in your offense's hands, keep the other offense off the field, then you're going to win most games. But, of course, Detroit, with their defense is going to force Minnesota off the field. They're going to force 3-and-outs. And I'll tell you, the only chance really Minnesota has that'll be close, like I'm saying, is I'm expecting Bridgewater to play. But if it turns out that Christian Ponder is the starter, then don't be surprised to see the Lions put a whooping on them. And at that point, it'll just be a matter of how many points they score. But Christian Ponder's the quarterback. I don't see the Vikings putting up more than maybe 6 points. The Lions won't need much more than that. They'll just get whatever they get. Maybe they'll just get 5 field goals or something. Maybe a touchdown. Who knows? But either way, the Lions win, in my opinion. Let me know what you think. Very interested to hear your ideas and opinions. Leave them in the comments section below. I'll do my best to respond, as I try to respond to any and all comments. Try to keep them somewhat positive. If they're negative, be constructive with your criticism. And if you like the show, make sure to hit the like button to let us know that you like the show. Otherwise, how would we know? And if you want more of this content, hit the subscribe button, as we are bringing you upon further reviews and recaps for each and every single football game in pro football throughout the season and the playoffs. We're also covering the baseball playoffs and some college football as well. And we do a weekly show, The Wedge, where we do quick picks, fantasy picks, a weekly rewind, and the Upon Further Review for the Thursday night show. So keep an eye out for that. Once again, thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. Hope you're having a wonderful day and having a great weekend, and enjoy all of the sports.